Aaron Montgomery Ward became one of the wealthiest men in Chicago by being one of the most hated men in America. That sentence should not make sense. Wealth is supposed to follow admiration, not contempt. Yet history remembers him for both at the same time. For more than 100 years, his name hung above department stores in nearly every American city. Millions of families have a memory tied to those green awnings, the Christmas windows, the thick catalog that arrived in the mail every season. The stores closed for good in 2001. 28,000 people lost their jobs that year. The man behind the name had been dead for almost a century by then. His name was Aaron Montgomery Ward. Here is the part that does not fit the story of a beloved businessman. In his own lifetime, the very people he served set his catalogs on fire in town squares. Newspapers called him a fraud, a swindler, a threat to honest commerce. Later, when he became rich and powerful in Chicago, the city itself turned against him. They called him an obstructionist. Some called him the most hated man on Michigan Avenue. He was forced into court 4 separate times, all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court before his enemies would leave him alone. He won every single case. Hello viewers, before we go further, answer this in one word in the comments. If your name was dragged into the mud for doing something you believed was right, would you have kept going? The company Ward built is gone now. But the thing he spent 20 years fighting to protect is still standing today, untouched, right in the middle of one of America's largest cities. Anyone who has walked along the Chicago lakefront has walked through his legacy without ever knowing it belonged to him. This is the story of how a man built an empire out of resentment, lost nearly everything more than once, and left behind a legacy that has nothing to do with the business that made him famous. Picture a small American town somewhere between 1875 and 1885. A shopkeeper steps out onto the wooden boardwalk in front of his store. In his hand is a thick paper catalog. He calls out to the street. A crowd gathers. He holds the catalog up so everyone can see it. Then he sets it on fire. This happened in towns across the Midwest more times than anyone bothered to count. Catalogs thrown into bonfires, torn apart in the street, condemned from church pulpits on Sunday mornings. Every single one of those catalogs carried the same name on the cover: Ward. What this man had done was simple enough to explain in one sentence. He printed a small catalog, mailed it directly to farmers across the Midwest, and offered to sell them goods cheaper than their local store ever could. The shopkeepers understood exactly what that meant. If it worked, they were finished. So while the fires kept burning in the town squares, something strange was happening at the same time, in the same houses, sometimes between the same husband and wife. The orders never stopped coming. To understand how a man could be hated and needed in the very same breath, we have to go back further to a 14-year-old boy in Michigan who had just been pulled out of school to earn his family's first extra dollar. Long before he built anything, Aaron Montgomery Ward was just a boy standing at a cutting machine earning 25 cents a day. Not for one afternoon, every day for as long as the work lasted. He was 14 years old. He had been born in February of 1843 in a small town in New Jersey. His father was not poor, but he was not wealthy either. When Aaron was 9, the family moved to Niles, Michigan, chasing steadier work on the edge of the railroad frontier. He left school at 14. There was no dramatic reason. The family simply needed the money more than they needed his education. His first job was in a factory that made barrel staves, 25 cents a day. Later, he moved to a brick kiln, stacking bricks in the heat for 30 cents. He rarely spoke about those years later in life,
A few short lines in a brief memoir, nothing more. Some chapters of a man's life are carried quietly, not because they were unimportant, but because they were foundational. Everything changed when he found work in a shoe store in a nearby town. Within 9 months, a country general store hired him away for $6 a month, with room and board included. For a boy from a working family, that felt like fortune. He rose fast. Within 3 years, he was running the entire store. His wages climbed from $6 a month to $100. By the time he turned 25, he understood something most men never bothered to learn. He understood exactly how a country store worked, what customers wanted, what they could actually afford, how much a shopkeeper marked up his goods, and how far a family could be pushed into debt before they stopped asking questions. In 1865, he left Michigan for Chicago with almost nothing. No connections, no guarantees, just an instinct that something bigger was waiting. He took work at a lamp wholesaler, then moved to a larger dry goods company. One of the men behind that company was named Marshall Field. Neither of them knew it yet, but that name would return later in this story, in a way Ward could never have predicted. For now, he was simply a clerk, nothing more. His next job changed everything. It required travel. He rode trains out from Chicago into Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, and Missouri, hiring a horse at each stop to reach the small crossroads stores scattered across farm country. He sat with shopkeepers, he took their orders, and more than anything, he listened. What he heard again and again was the same complaint. Store owners bought goods cheap from city wholesalers, then marked them up 2 or 3 times over before selling to farmers who had no other option. No competition for 50 miles in any direction, no refunds if something broke, no choice at all. The farmers were not foolish. They understood exactly how badly they were being squeezed. They simply had nowhere else to go. Riding back toward Chicago one evening, Ward did the math in his head. If a man could buy directly from manufacturers in bulk, pay cash, and ship goods by rail straight to those same farmers, he could undercut every local store in the country and still turn a profit. A catalog could replace the traveling salesman, the railroad could replace the wagon, and the post office could carry the orders home. It was a simple idea. Almost everyone he mentioned it to thought it would fail. He spent 2 years quietly saving toward it anyway. Before you keep going, do something for the story, not for me. Hit subscribe to Old Money series, because the next fortune we uncover might be even stranger than this one, and you will not want to miss where it goes. By 1871, he nearly had enough money to begin. Then, Chicago caught fire. By the time the flames stopped, Aaron Montgomery Ward had nothing left to start his business with. The Great Chicago Fire began on the night of October 8, 1871, a spark on the west side, a dry wind off the prairie. Within 2 days, more than 2,000 acres of the city were gone. 300 people were dead. 100,000 were left without homes. Ward's entire savings had been converted into a small stock of goods sitting in a warehouse near the center of the city, waiting for the day he could finally print his first catalog. He walked down to see it once the smoke cleared. There was nothing left to see.
A different man might have stopped there. He was 28 years old, with no wealthy family to call on, and friends who already thought his plan was foolish before the fire ever touched it. He started saving again from nothing. Somewhere in that same difficult year, he married Elizabeth Cobb of Kalamazoo, Michigan. 2 people building a life on almost nothing, betting on an idea most people still refuse to take seriously.
By August of 1872, with the help of two co-workers who agreed to invest alongside him, he had scraped together exactly $1,600. $1,600, that was the entire founding capital of a company that would, within a single generation, change the way an entire country shopped. He rented a small shipping room on North Clark Street. Then he printed his first catalog. It was a single sheet of paper, 163 items, no pictures, just descriptions, prices, and one condition: cash only. He mailed it across the Midwest and waited. The first year gave him almost nothing back. Orders trickled in slowly. His two partners grew nervous. More than once, it looked like the entire idea might quietly die before anyone outside a handful of small towns ever heard his name. Then something shifted. A farmers' organization known as the Grange, with more than 200,000 members across the Midwest, had been searching for a way to buy goods directly from manufacturers on behalf of its members. Late that year, they chose Ward as their official purchasing agent. Almost overnight, everything changed. The single sheet grew into 8 pages, then 32. Within 2 years, the business was no longer a gamble. It was profitable. In 1875, Ward added one more line to his catalog, a sentence almost no one in retail had ever dared to print before: "Satisfaction guaranteed, or your money back." In an economy built entirely on the rule that once you bought something, it was yours no matter what condition it arrived in, Ward was offering the exact opposite to strangers he would never meet face to face. It cost him money. Some customers took advantage of it. But it bought him something no country merchant could compete with: trust. If a story like this is holding your attention, this channel exists for exactly this reason: uncovering the fortunes history forgot to explain properly. So if you have not already, join Old Money series before the next one goes up, because you will want to already be here for it. You could order a violin. You could order a steam engine, ready-made dresses, barbed wire, bird cages, hymnals, saddles, windmills. The catalog had become something almost impossible to categorize. Not a magazine, not exactly a store. 1,000 pages of ink and illustration mailed for free to anyone who asked, functioning as a kind of window into a country most of its readers would otherwise never see. Families gave it a nickname of their own: the Wish Book. For households scattered across the Great Plains and the cotton farms of the South, it was sometimes the only thick book in the home besides the family Bible. Parents read the descriptions aloud after supper. Children memorized the pages of toys they knew they would never own. Young women cut pictures of dresses from its pages and pinned them to their bedroom walls, imagining a life they had not yet lived. This success rested on 3 things working together at exactly the right moment in history. The first was the railroad. By the 1880s, the United States had laid more track than the rest of the world combined, and Ward built his entire operation around it. An order placed on a Monday could be on a train by Wednesday and waiting at a rural station by Saturday. For families used to waiting weeks for a traveling wagon, this felt close to impossible. The second was the post office. In 1896, the government introduced rural free delivery, carrying mail directly to farmhouse mailboxes instead of leaving it at a distant town office. Ward had spent years quietly pushing for this change because he understood something simple. If his catalog could arrive at the end of a farmer's own driveway, half of his work was already finished. The third was the promise itself. By the late 1880s, the money-back guarantee was no longer just a sentence printed on a page. It had become a habit, tested for over a decade by thousands of ordinary families who had sent back a broken stove or a torn dress and received their money without an argument. By 1894, roughly 3 million catalogs were leaving his warehouse every single year, each one weighing almost 4 pounds. The building itself became something close to legend. Its hallways were so long that workers used roller skates simply to move between sections faster. In 1946, more than 35 years after Ward had died, a society of book collectors in New York ranked the 100 books that had shaped American culture the most. They included Walden. They included the Federalist Papers. They also included the Montgomery Ward catalog. By the turn of the century, the company had outgrown 3 separate buildings. Ward needed something permanent, something built to match what his idea had become. He already had a piece of land in mind. What he chose to do with that land would soon make him one of the most hated men in the entire city of Chicago, for reasons that had nothing to do with catalogs at all. There is a strip of green land along the Chicago lakefront that has looked almost the same for 100 years. No towers, no buildings blocking the water, just open lawn rolling down to Lake Michigan. It exists because one man refused to stop fighting for it, even after it cost him almost everything the public once thought of him. In the 1890s, Ward discovered an old promise buried in the city's own property records. Decades earlier, the land along Michigan Avenue had been designated to remain, in the exact words of the original deed, forever open, clear, and free.
Developers wanted to build there anyway. So did powerful figures at City Hall. Ward believed the promise should be honored exactly as it was written. So he sued. Not once, 4 separate times, all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court, stretched out across nearly 20 years of his life. The public did not thank him for it. Newspapers painted him as a man standing in the way of progress. Real estate developers called him worse. He was labeled an obstructionist. Some called him the most hated man on Michigan Avenue, a nickname that followed him for the rest of his life. He kept fighting anyway. He won all 4 cases. The land was never his to profit from. He simply believed a promise made on paper should mean something, even decades later, even when defending it made him despised by the very city he had helped build. Ask yourself something for a moment. If keeping your word cost you your reputation, would you still keep it? Years later, a strangely similar pattern would return to the company Ward had built, in a different form, under a different man, with far higher stakes. After Ward's death, leadership of the company eventually passed to a man named Sewell Avery. During the Second World War, Avery clashed publicly with the federal government over labor demands, refusing to comply with an order during wartime. The standoff escalated so far that soldiers were sent to physically remove him from his own office chair while he sat with his arms crossed, refusing to leave willingly. He returned to his position once the war ended and the government handed the company back. It was what came next that quietly destroyed everything Ward had built. Convinced that America was heading into another economic collapse after the war, Avery refused to expand the company into the suburbs growing rapidly across the country. He held on to cash instead and waited for a crash that never came.
While competitors built new stores exactly where American families were now living, Montgomery Ward stood still. By the 1950s, the gap could no longer be ignored. In 1955, a wave of shareholder pressure finally forced Avery out of power. He died several years later, having never publicly admitted the mistake. The company spent the next 2 decades trying to recover ground it should never have lost in the first place. The same conviction that once made a man brave enough to fight his own city for 20 years had, in a different form, become the very thing that slowly suffocated his company from the inside. By the late 1990s, the company that Aaron Montgomery Ward built from $1,600 and a single sheet of paper filed for bankruptcy. It attempted to recover. It failed again shortly after. On December 28th, in the year 2000, the decision was made final. Every remaining store would close. Through the spring of 2001, 250 stores shut their doors, one after another, until nothing remained. 28,000 people lost their jobs in the process. A company built from nothing in 1872 had taken 129 years to disappear completely. It had outlived its founder by 88 years. And yet, somewhere in the city of Chicago, 2 things Ward left behind are still standing today, doing exactly what he intended them to do, with almost no one left who remembers his name. The lakefront park he fought 20 years to protect is still open, still empty of buildings, still facing the lake exactly as that old promise once demanded. Not far from it stands a limestone building bearing an inscription few passers-by ever stopped to read. It is now part of a hospital and medical school, funded largely through the estate his widow, Elizabeth, left behind after his death, built to train doctors for generations she would never live to meet. The catalog is gone. The stores are gone. The name above the doors has disappeared from the American landscape entirely. But an empty stretch of grass beside Lake Michigan and a hospital that has trained doctors for nearly a century are still quietly carrying his legacy forward every single day, without a single person needing to know who he was. Before you go, this channel is not finished uncovering fortunes built on the edge of ruin and reputation. If you want to understand how old money survives, disappears, or quietly reinvents itself generations later, make sure you are subscribed to Old Money series, because the next name we uncover built a fortune even larger than this one, and the way his family lost nearly all of it involves a secret that stayed buried for almost 60 years. You will not want to be away from this channel when that story goes up.